So I got the question recently from a mom who really wants to make homeschooling more fun. What do you do when your kid hates a certain subject? Like math or science or history or geography. They just hate it. They don't cooperate. They whine, they cry, they fuss. They're like,
this is so boring. When am I really going to use this in my real life? What does this have to do with anything?
the moms have to try to get their kids to do the schoolwork, and the kids just hate it. They would rather be doing the fun stuff. It was really interesting. This morning, I was teaching art to a handful of kids. Some of them were homeschooled. Some of them were part of a classical homeschool co-op, and some of them were kids that go to public school. And as I was teaching them the little art lessons, they started talking about what their school is like. And one of them was saying,
we have art in school, but it's really boring.
And I said, well, what's your favorite subject? And they're like,
everything is boring.
And so I asked one of them, well, what do you like best? And he's like,
well, I'll tell you what I don't like. I hate math.
And I'm like, really? You hate math? Do you like money and cooking? And do you like sports and keeping score? He's like, yeah, I love that stuff. I'm like, well, it sounds like you like math. He's like, no, math is so boring. And it's just, I just hate it. I'm like, but math is all about numbers, and we need numbers in the real world to be able to earn and spend money, to keep score at a game. And he's like, really? He didn't make the association between math, numbers, and the real world. He thought it was all about just memorizing a lot of facts. So we had a little conversation about math and numbers in the real world. And then I told him, at my house, we don't do math. We work with money, we work with clocks, we work with recipes, we build stuff, we measure, we keep score, we use calculators. There's so many things that you need numbers for that math can be just a part of normal everyday life. And here's the thing. Math in school is supposed to help kids prepare for math that they might have to do someday in the real world, right? They need to know the math that they might have to use for their jobs or for recipes or for earning and spending money, for making change, for keeping score, for measuring and for building. When you homeschool, here's the good news. You can learn math in the real world instead of in textbooks, workbooks, and on computers. And your kids won't hate math because most kids are really fascinated by this stuff and they want some of it. And learning how to earn, manage, use, budget money, that should be one of the first lessons. Give your child a handful of change and take them to a garage sale. Math lesson number 1, what can I buy? Math lesson number 2, let's build something. And so you decide, what do you want to build? You want to build a birdhouse or a tree house or a toy boat, anything. Guess what? We need to measure. So you get out your measuring tapes and your rulers, and suddenly you're doing math, and it's really fun. Now, some of the best math of all is found in the Lego instruction books. Your kids are doing all kinds of math when they're building Legos from a kit. So if your kid says, I hate math, I would suggest you take a break from workbooks, textbooks, and memorizing math facts and spend more time with Legos, recipes, building materials, and money. And so this is really a tip for beginning math, elementary math. There's so much you can do in the real world that helps prepare your child to understand how to use math in school. Helping kids just get a really good understanding of math, also patterns, making jewelry with patterns, understanding timelines, when things happen in the world, that's math. And a lot of times kids are fascinated with the timeline of their life. How many years ago was your 4th birthday? And how many years will you be 20? Simple things like this. We don't need to just focus on multiplication, division, subtraction. How do you use these things in the real world? How do you use fractions? Once a child sees how these things are used in the real world, then it's going to make sense on paper later. But don't start with paper, start with the real world. Now, once your kids are getting older, you're going to want to get deeper into these subjects. But you still want to keep math fun, and you want it to be something that is going to be useful for their life. And so instead of teaching the typical math to my kids, we really decided to focus on money, business, economics. And my oldest son and his wife created this book to help kids learn about money, economics, and business. I'll show you a little bit of what's inside. So, what is currency? The story of money, money around the world, budgeting money. What is a bank? What is credit? Credit cards, debit, good debt versus bad debt. These are things that kids really want to know about. It's way more interesting than most of the things in a textbook because money is relevant to everyone. And then, how do you earn money? Kids want to know what they're going to do when they grow up so they can earn money and buy things and support themselves. And so the next part of this book is understanding the way people make money. So what it means to be an employee, what it means to be self-employed, what it means to be a business owner, what it means to be an investor. You know, one way one of my kids learned a lot about math and money was by getting really into dogs. She is crazy about dogs, and she wanted to work with dogs, and she wanted to make money off dogs, so she started a dog accessory business. And then she started breeding high-quality golden retrievers, and as a teen, she has raised 16 puppies and sold them all for like $600 to $800 each, and was able to do what it takes to take care of a horse. And then she started a dog babysitting business. And it's just fascinating what you can do. So she was never interested in math, but she was interested in dogs, and she was interested in getting a horse. And at the time, it would have been completely impossible for us to have a property and have a horse, but it was her dream to have a horse. What she ended up doing was deciding she would get a horse, board it somewhere else, and I said, yeah, you can do that if you can pay for the boarding, you can pay for the food, you can pay for the vet bills. At 14 years old, we figured out, well, I asked her, how much does it cost per month to take care of a horse? Once we added it up and rounded it up to about $800 to $1,000 a month, you know, just in case there's an emergency, and all that money for boarding. And we were living in Hawaii at the time. Everything's more expensive in Hawaii. So I'm like, you're going to have $800 to $1,000 a month to take care of a horse. So how are you going to do that? We went to a bookstore, and I said, you're going to have to learn how to start a business, and how you're going to have to market that business. You're going to have to figure out a product to sell. And so we went to the business section, the business entrepreneur section of a bookstore, got lots of books off the shelf, probably about 25 books. She just sat there. She was 14, 15 years old, maybe 13. No, I think she was about to turn 14. I said, whatever ones you want, I'll get for you. And so she sat there in the bookstore looking through all these books, and she picked out about 10 books on business, marketing, social media, management, all kinds of stuff. And I got her those books, and that was her school for like 6 months, was just spending time with those books and figuring out how to start a business. And then one day she announced that she was ready for me to invest in her first business. Now, let me tell you something we do with our kids. When they are turning 13 or sometimes 14, it depends. Some kids grow up a little faster than others and are ready to become, business owners at an earlier age. So instead of waiting until they're 18 or 19 to invest many, many tens of thousands of dollars for them to go to college, we allow them to major in their career goal starting at age 13, and we invest in their first business, usually $1,000 to $3,000, instead of $60,000 to $100,000 or more for college. The idea is that during this period of time, between 13 and 16, they are going to be able to go really deep into the goals they have and the skills they need for the career that they dream of. And so we invest a lot of time, energy, and resources, a lot of tools, whatever they need to launch their first business. And that is what they major in for all their teen years, building a business and developing all the skills they need for their business before they are an adult. So by the time they're 18 or 19, they have a business that's generating an income that can help them launch into adulthood without going into debt to get a degree. So far, we've launched 5 kids into adulthood, and they are supporting themselves. It's not always easy, but they all have been building skills for 4 or 5 years during their teen years instead of spending time on irrelevant things. So my daughter Naomi, for her 14th birthday, she said, "Okay, Mom, I started a business. I have 40 orders, and I need you to invest $1,400 in all the equipment I need to make my orders." I'm like, "What do you mean you started a business and you have 40 orders that you have to have made?" She's like, "Yeah, I'm making ecologically friendly dog accessories. And I started an Instagram, and I did a dog model search, and then I made samples of the dog accessories that I want to sell, and I sent them to all the models, and they did photo shoots with their dogs, and now I have 40 orders." I'm like, "Okay." So we went ahead, and for her 14th birthday, we got her everything she needed to launch her dog accessory business. And that business has grown to be able to support her horse hobby and her dog hobby and all sorts of things. And she's bought a couple of trucks. She started to support all her hobbies and to develop all her skills at age 13 with just a goal of having to have enough money to support a horse. What does your child dream of? What do they want? What expensive thing is out of reach that would motivate them to get a little more interested in math? So the end goal is not that your child would be good at math. The end goal is that your child would be good at managing money, earning money, using a budget, spending wisely, understanding what it takes to accomplish their goals. You need math to be able to measure. You need math to be able to figure out timelines and how long it's going to take to do certain things. You need math for the kitchen. And some people need math that is way more complex to do their careers. So if you have a child who wants to be an engineer or some other type of job that's going to require higher level math, they're going to be incredibly motivated to learn what it takes to be what they want to be. But you got to make sure you don't keep it boring, because boring kills creativity. So a couple other ways that I want to encourage you to start teaching your kids math is through baking. Baking is a great way to learn math. And so my daughter Anna created the Baker's Fun Schooling Journal for kids who are majoring in baking. And you can learn all kinds of things about history, social studies, culture, math, geography, through baking and even literature. So your child can major in baking and cover so many other subjects that they find boring. There are a lot of numbers involved in sports. So if you have a child who loves sports and thinks they don't love math, the Athlete's Fun Schooling Journal is going to do a great job teaching them how to research all sorts of things related to sports, but they're going to get into the geography of sports, the history of sports, the science of sports, the math of sports. You're going to make a lot of school subjects way more fun when they get to study what they love and learn everything at the same time. One of my favorite books that I created is called Are You a Math Genius? And this is for older kids, usually teens, ages 10 and up with a calculator. But this is a math therapy book for kids who are a little bit older and they think that they're bad at math. And you get them a book, Are You a Math Genius? It's the inventor's book of calculation games. This is a math book for creative kids who are inventive and love to design and love to create and think that they're bad at math. And so in this book, they're going to learn math that's necessary to run a creative business. And they're going to learn what it takes to hire employees, to pay them, how much per hour, how much to complete a project, all while focusing on these really fun and crazy inventions. For a lot of kids, they think they don't enjoy a certain subject because we take that subject out of context. Let's say that your child hates geography. I bet they would love travel. Let's say your child hates social studies. I bet they would love fashion and food and just studying the holidays and learning about how people around the world celebrate their holidays. There's so many ways to make social studies fun because you're learning about how people live all over the world. And then when your child says they hate history, think about what they do love and start studying the history of that thing that they're so excited about. I'll tell you a little story about what changed my perspective on all the subjects. When I was 13 and in 7th grade at a public school, I was really, really struggling. I had been held back in 3rd grade, failed 3rd grade. And I don't think 8-year-olds should ever be considered failures, but I thought I was a failure. And so school was really hard for me because I was really bad at it, really hated it, and I was a year older than all the kids and they wondered why, and it was because I failed. So by the time I was 13 and going on 14 and in 7th grade, I was just really discouraged. And my little sister started homeschooling because she had some health problems and it was becoming very impractical for her to go to school. And so my mom bought a lot of private school curriculum for her. It was very expensive and also looked very boring, but I would be willing to do it so I wouldn't have to go to school. My mom began to get these Homeschooling Today magazines. I think that's what it was, Homeschooling Today. And these magazines would be sitting around the living room and I would pick them up and it looked so interesting. And when you would read these magazines, I found out anyone could homeschool. And so there are all these articles about how anyone can homeschool. And I'm like, oh, if anyone can homeschool, maybe I can homeschool. And so I began to ask my parents if I can homeschool too. Then I began to tell them about all the terrible things that were happening in my middle school. And they said, well, maybe you can homeschool next year, but we don't have money for books. And I thought, there's got to be a way to solve this problem. And I said, there's a library like 3 or 4 blocks away from our house. Don't they have enough books for me to get an education? And my parents said, that's a really good point. So after Christmas vacation, I never went back to school. Instead, I walked to the library. My mom had given me a stack of those black and white composition journals, and she wrote on the cover of each one, science, social studies, history, language arts, and geography. She sent me in the library and she said, see if you can talk to the librarian and ask her to give you a book on each subject on your grade level. So I get to the library, find the librarian, and I said, I'm doing my school at home and I need all the books for 7th grade for each subject. And she's like, oh, well, this will be fun. Let's go to the oversized book section and you can look through the books and then tell me what you're interested in. What are you interested in? And I'm like, I don't know what I'm interested in. I like art, but nobody ever really asked me that. I thought in school they just tell you what you have to learn. She's like, well, all these subjects that you have to study are just in everything. So just go to the oversized book section and figure out what you're interested in. So I went to the oversized book section and just spread out all kinds of books all over the floor, looking through them all. Lots of them had like big art and illustrations and photos, and my curiosity began to just unleash as I just looked through these books with the question, what am I interested in? What am I curious about? In school, they never ask you what you're interested in. They never ask you what you're curious about. But at the library, I mean, this was like 35 years ago? And I still remember it like it was yesterday because that experience had such a profound impact on my heart and mind. After a while, I showed up at the librarian's desk with this huge stack of books. And I can still picture it in my mind today, what I had chosen. I had the history of fashion. I had fashion design. I had books on ancient Egypt, archaeology, hieroglyphics. I had books on architecture, Victorian architecture, building, brain development, nutrition, and I also sparked an interest in alternative alphabets and got interested in Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. And so I brought the librarian all these books and I'm like, okay, can you tell me which subject each of these are? And she's like, almost all of these cover every subject. And so I took those black and white composition journals my mom had given me and I crossed out history and I wrote fashion. And then I took the one that said science and I crossed out science and I wrote something like nutrition, food, and brain development. I took another one and I crossed out language arts and I just put languages, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, hieroglyphics, Egyptian, and then I took, I think maybe history, crossed that out, and just wrote ancient Egypt, architecture, Victorian pioneer life, and then I had to carry all these books home, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do and how I was supposed to learn all the subjects, but what I did do is something that my mom called unit studies. She's like, oh, I guess we're doing unit studies. I read about that in some of these Homeschooling Today magazines. So she just let me study all the things I was passionate about. And so I filled those little notebooks with everything that I was curious about and made a book about ancient Egypt, a book about the history of fashion, a book about the pioneers. What I didn't have coming home from the library was anything about math. And so my dad was like, hey, where's the math? I was hoping that they wouldn't say, hey, where's the math? But they said, hey, where's the math? And I said, well, how about I start a business and I build a fort in the backyard? Doesn't that count as math? And my dad's like, well, yeah, business involves money. Money involves math. Building a house involves geometry. Geometry is math. And then my dad actually got really involved with me starting in a jewelry making business and then using that money to build my fort in the backyard. And then that fort I built in the backyard, I decided was going to be a pioneer cottage, and nothing was allowed to go in my pioneer cottage that didn't exist before like 1875. And so then I began to just have such a fun childhood where I was making jewelry, going to art shows, making money, building a cottage, designing Egyptian mummy cases out of clay, learning alphabets from other parts of the world. And I also was really into learning about fashion, and I wanted to make my own clothes, but my mom was really too busy to take me any farther in learning how to sew. And so she found out that I could join 4-H and learn how to sew through 4-H. And so then I joined 4-H and I learned how to sew. I learned photography. I learned about taking care of small animals, was able to participate in the county fair. So I went from being super, super bored in a really dark school with classrooms that were like, some of them didn't even have windows, to living this beautiful life at 13, 14 years old, running a business, making my own clothes, building a fort in the woods, growing and foraging for my own food, learning how to tame wild animals. And what happened to all the school subjects? They were all there. And so at the end of this first 6 months of homeschooling, my mom said that I had to take this standardized test, And so we went back to the school and I had to sit in a desk and I had to take a test. And I'm like, my parents are like, well, we didn't really do school. And she said, well, don't worry about this test. It's going to show us where your learning gaps are so that when we get you real curriculum next year, we can make sure that we're getting you the curriculum that's on the correct level so that you won't be falling behind. And a month or two later, they get the scores back. And after just 6 months of homeschooling with this stack of oversized library books, I scored on an 11th grade level on almost every subject and 8th grade level on spelling. I'd always struggled with spelling, but considering I was in 7th grade and I scored on an 8th to an 11th grade level in every subject, I asked my parents, hey, does that mean I don't have to do school until 12th grade except spelling? And they're like, no, you still have to do school. But they figured out that my method of doing school with the oversized library books was pretty effective. Also, I was able to skip a grade and be in the correct grade that I was supposed to be in because I had always been pretty ashamed of failing 3rd grade. I hope you learned lots of fun and inspiring stuff. And don't worry, if your kid hates a school subject, figure out where they might use that subject in the real world and build their curriculum and their life around the things they love. I'm sure that subject they hate is going to be part of it, but they won't hate it anymore. Let's get serious for a second. Sometimes kids struggle with math and they hate math because they actually have something going on with their brain that makes them feel really confused about numbers. That's why we created this series of games called Mathcraft. The kids do a lot of crafting and creating games that help them overcome problems commonly associated with dyscalculia. So check that out on funschooling.com. You can also look for those other resources that I showed you to keep every subject super fun. I'm going to be answering questions every week as long as people keep asking questions. So feel free to post a question in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss a video. Thanks so much.